Should I do introductions? Mike, Taylor, do you want to do a quick introduction? I think Kate, people know the two of us.
So yeah, sure. So Mike Taylor, I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I work for Nationwide in a information risk area in a strategy and planning group,
Okay.
which is an interesting place to live for an L&D person. And just kind of, I've had the really great fortune. I've done a little bit of everything. So I spent a couple years as a community manager for Articulate. I've been at small companies, big companies, everywhere in between. So I've literally seen all ends of the spectrum, and um, just about everything that learning people have done, good, bad, and ugly.
Okay. Well, what I will say is, folks, if you are not following Mike Taylor on social media, you should be, because Mike, you make a ton of incredible, valuable resources for the learning community. So kudos to you for all you do on that one.
Thank you, thank you. I find a lot of that stuff for myself. This is a big thing. I just had this conversation with somebody at lunch today, right? Like if you find something, if you're learning, everybody who's learning has stuff to share, because if it helps you, it's probably going to help somebody else. And so I think that's a good sort of perspective to adopt.
That's right. That's right. If you're doing good stuff, just share it, because somebody else will benefit from it. So we're going to be talking about this, and I get to hang out with this group, but really the experts are Mike and Kate, because we're going to be talking about how do we grab people's attention in this, and we're going to try and connect some dots between learning and marketing, going back to this whole learning needs to operate more like marketing, and then like, what does that really mean? And Kate, you're a marketing guru, by the way, and so like, how do we actually do that? But what does that mean? Because I've seen it come up in things, and I go, I don't think that's really what we're trying to do. So with this one, I'm actually curious both of your perspectives on this, because I do hear this. L&D needs to operate more like marketing. And how do both of you respond to that? Because I think there are definitely some truths to that, but with some nuance.
I'd probably give the word to Mike first.
Okay,
So
I'll pass the mic
we'll
to
save the
Mike.
best for last is what we'll do on that one. So so I think, and Kate can correct me here if I misspeak anywhere along the line. So it's nice to have a backup here. But to me, I think the probably biggest thing, we touched on this earlier when we were chatting earlier about just throwing out a big wave of facts and figures and logic and all that sort of stuff. And I think the thing that marketers do much better as a whole is speak to kind of the primal brain, like our subconscious. The way that humans operate is we make a lot of decisions based on super fast reactions that we have subconsciously. So there's a statistic, 95 to 98% of this cognition that's happening in our head is never raises to the level of consciousness. And what happens is we make decisions subconsciously, and then we backfill the logic after the fact. So there's all kinds of research and science to that. And I was guilty, early in my career, I'm trying to put something out, and the first thing you intuitively go to is facts and figures, thinking like, oh, well, that's logical and everybody will be logical.
Yeah.
But people are not wired to be logical. We're emotional creatures. And I think that emotion piece is what's missing from a lot of the stuff that I see.
Okay. It's a really good point, and I'm glad you bring that up, because I see the same thing in the measurement conversation, where at the executive level, there's lots of topics about like, well, how do we prove the value of L&D and the ROI? And a lot of times we do it through these facts and figures. Here's the bullets of all this stuff. And in my entire career, it's never been those facts and figures that made the exec team go, wow, you guys are killing it. That's not what makes them jump out of their chairs and go, how much money do you need? Like, what kind of resources do you want? Yet, so often that's what we do is go, well, logically, if I just make the case and am reasonable in my argument, then it'll go. So Kate, as a marketer though, is there some truth in that? Or, how do you nuance that?
Well, of course, there is lots of truth in that, but probably I should start with saying that despite the fact that we all hear lots of debates like L&D should get something from marketing and do their work better just because marketing is so great and it's kind of a one-size-fits-all solution, and you'll definitely improve your learning and development stuff with marketing techniques. Well, there is a kind of a tricky situation because marketing is a huge space. It includes lots of
It is
spaces
huge.
inside, like really inbound marketing, outbound marketing, channel marketing, content marketing, CEO marketing, like lots of really important stuff. And as for an average learning designer, you don't actually need that information to do your job better. But as a person who have a marketing background, I understand that the very first and most important step you need to understand as a learning designer that actually will improve your job is to have the kind of a marketing background and marketing mindset. What I mean actually is that a marketing person always has an understanding that there is a very short period of time, just probably some seconds, to get someone's attention, to deliver their message, and to make someone's behavior changed. It may be
Okay.
like buying a new product or a new service, or just replacing something you are using already, but it's something that can be done differently. And we really care about every second of our customers' attention. That's not
Okay.
something that is always true with learning and development. Like
No.
we sometimes think that, oh, probably this 1 hour long webinar is something that people would appreciate. Like, but
Or again, because we think it's important, it's easy to assume that, well, they will. They'll enjoy and appreciate it because we really care deeply about this.
yeah. So just having that mindset that every second of someone's attention is precious and they have lots of other things to do, and we need to kind of grab their attention to what we have prepared for them is kind of a cool thing you should start with. Not like techniques or, tools or anything like that, but that very mindset.
Okay. Well, and I like one of the things you brought up that I really like that you broke down is marketing. It's just like L&D. Sometimes L&D gets painted with this broad brush, like, oh, learning and development is this. And it's like, well, actually, no, it's a very complicated and nuanced function. And marketing's the same way. So when we say be more like marketing, it's like, well, what do you mean when you say that? And I know from where I'm sitting, I have to take a lot of different components of that because like my analytics team would learn from the marketing analytics group. My design team learns elements of that. But again, depending on the audience, which we got a lot of designers who this would be the audience, not all of that is going to be relevant. So I appreciate you calling that piece out. And what you brought up about the attention economy of people's attention is being stretched super, super, super thin, and to try and capture that quickly. But then there's also the balance of we don't just need people consuming garbage, right? We don't want to build TikTok. So, Mike, I'm curious as a learning person, how do you think about that? Because it is about attention, but when we think about learning, it's not just about attention and kind of short-term behavior. Hopefully what we're doing is trying to drive longer-term sustainable behavior.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of things in that question. First, you still have to have value, so you can't just do things that get attention if there's not value behind it, because people will figure that out pretty quickly and they'll stop paying attention. One of the things that drives me crazy is we have opportunities, whether it's the compliance course that everybody gets every year or whatever, and that first initial experience, like we have that opportunity to grab their attention. And what do you see sometimes, right? Like bullet points of in this course, like nobody cares, right? Like I like, don't make me go through.
Tell me what you really think, Mike.
I haven't even started, right?
Yeah.
So, we can't waste it. The thing I think marketers, another one of the things that marketers, they recognize the competition that's out there for people's attention. I mean, we're bombarded by tens of thousands of messages and emails and texts and advertisements and spam and like all day long. And so, our brains are really good at filtering most of that stuff out, including sort of the billboard on the left there, which might have been built by a training department. We don't know. But like we see that and our brains just filter it out. right?
Yeah.
It might as well be the visual equivalent of the Charlie Brown teacher, want, 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 want. Like nobody cares.
Right. Well, and to your point on that, even the bold statement, it's assuming that like the person's going to agree with that statement. And if they don't agree with that statement, they're automatically going to tune it out because it's like, well, I don't think I should eat more McDonald's. So I'm just going to dismiss literally everything else. Versus to your point on the McDonald's one, I'm not operating off an assumption. I'm trying to show you, hey, does this grab your attention? If so, then you should care without having to go, I assume you care. Here's why.
And the one on the right, like I think, like I can't help but like, oh, that looks pretty good. Actually, it's kind of maybe I'm getting hungry, even I'm having that sort of thought, versus that doesn't happen on the left. So that emotional piece. And one of the things I ask a lot of people this, I always ask people, if there's one thing or if there are things that you wish you could steal from marketing, like what would that be? And, a lot of times it's, money and budget and graphics and that sort of stuff. But I think my very favorite answer that I've ever gotten is I wish I could have marketing's efficiency of messaging. Right. And so you think about a 15-second commercial, how much meaning a marketer can get into that versus, bullet points and typical stuff that we've seen.
Well, I should just give my 2 cents in it because, Mike, when it comes to McDonald's advertising, like there is kind of a huge amount of resources and time investment and creativity and teams. It's just like a great campaign that is delivered by lots of people. And an average learning designer actually has no such resources. But what we actually can pay attention to, like, this is actually, for the record, the slide from the presentation of Mike. I stumbled upon on his website. Highly recommended. Lots of great resources there. And
he's got a whole fan club coming now based
Absolutely.
on the chat.
Yeah, and I was really inspired by this example because now you can see 2 different approaches. And what I see kind of in the right part is that there is a very, very straightforward messaging. There is a very emotional visual that not just is there for, being there, but to emphasize the emotion. And sometimes you don't really need any visual at all because your headline can speak for itself. And when it comes to kind of a grabbing attention of your learner, if we speak about some tactical things, just like start with a headline. We at 7tabs have a kind of an offer that our customers can send some mini courses to us and we give some feedback and thus we can improve some content. And the very first step I always take is like kind of analyze the headline. For example, when you have a headline telling performance management review, it doesn't tell anything, but just compare it to something that can sound like how to make your review less scary and more valuable in 5 simple steps. There is something in it, just like for a learner, they will just think that they should invest their time, right? So it all comes down to some very, very targeted questions you address. And you don't actually need a great marketing team and great resources behind. You need to understand the relevance and the learning need. Does it resonate?
No, what's funny? Well, and what's funny about you bringing this up is this is in a lot of the conversations I have on the leadership level where we often are very literal in the things we describe, and we often assume that people know what we're talking about. So we're guilty of this in HR all the time. Well, let's talk about the talent life cycle, and it's like, nobody has any clue what you're talking about. They have no idea what you just said, and you expect them not only to care, but then actually to read further on through the TLDR page of stuff that's like, I don't even know what you're saying, let alone care enough to pay attention. And I know, some of the things you talked about, I tend to play around with all sorts of stuff. And on my YouTube channel have played around a lot of this with the YouTube shorts to not try and pack the entire thing into 60 seconds, but to say, what is that catchy? Why should you care about this? that I can unpack very quickly that then can push to a longer thing. Because I think to some of the points of this, can you always create the billboard that tells somebody everything they need to know? Well, no, you can't. There is this longer form stuff, but there is that message that you can use to grab the attention to help make them care and then drive them to it. So I'm curious, Mike, on your end, like, how do you balance that? Because I think sometimes that's where I see the pendulum swing is, oh, so everything has to be 60 seconds or fit on one slide. And you're like, well, good grief. Some stuff's just more complicated than that.
Yeah, I want to answer that, but I want to just point out, like, there's a couple, when it comes to headlines and titles, there's some online tools that you can use that will give you scores, and it will give you feedback about how to make better, more attention-getting.
Bring on the resources, Mike.
CoSchedule, and they're free. So CoSchedule has, if you search headline analyzer, title analyzer, you'll get some. CoSchedule is the one I like. ShareThrough has one, and we do this in the workshop, and we give them really boring compliance titles and have them write new ones, see who can get the high score. But it's really useful. I still use it, right? Like if I'm publishing something, I'm like, I spend extra time because that's what's going to bring people in. 80% of the people read the title and never get any further than that. So it's really, really important.
Yeah.
To the point about everything needs to be 30 seconds or 60 seconds, I think that's where, the idea, marketers have a content strategy. Not everything is one format. And you have a campaign, and you're going to have a mix of different types of content in different channels for different types of people based on where they are. You don't give, a new hire the same stuff as you're going to give, somebody who's been doing the job for 20 years. And so you have this content strategy that's a mix of things to get, the right content to the right people in the right amounts at the right time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think I'm seeing people talk about like some of the implications of AI in this. And I think this is one of those things that can help you with some of this, to help you kind of, how do we do the catchy? How do we actually take, maybe here's what our topic is, but how could I say this in a way that's more attention grabbing or gets to the meat of what we're really trying to get across, so that we're not spending nearly as much time doing it?
And I'm also sharing my favorite tool, Quillbot, that actually can help you shorten your messages in any way, just like creative, or make it simpler, or make it easy to understand. I love it. Just like try it out. And for all the folks who, for example, can think like, I cannot shorten my content, it's just brief enough, and no other way I can make it more consumable and snackable, just try Quillbot out. I bet
one.
you have some fun trying it out.
That's a good one.
I love that you bring that up, but I mentioned it on Lisa's, and it is one of those things where we can be stuck in this mindset of, well, there's just no way I can say this more concisely. And it's like, actually, yes, you can. You can. And if you're really intentional, you always can sit and trim these things down and go, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to be more creative, or how can I incorporate a visual to tell part of that story so I don't have to be quite as verbal or verbose in the way that I'm doing it.
There is one of my favorite ads of all time. Subaru has fantastic ads, and they have an ad. It's 30 seconds, but the entire ad, there's only 2 words in the whole ad, and it's a car that's just smashed way. It's like, nobody could have survived that, right? And it's on the highway, and the highway patrolman talks to the tow truck flatbed driver. He says, "They lived." And then the tow truck driver drives it to the junkyard, tells to the next guy. He says, "They lived." And they do that a couple times, and they get to the end. The dad walks out with his family in their new Subaru, and they say, "We lived." And compare that to a pile of charts and facts and figures.
Right.
Wow.
Here's all the safety statistics. Here's all the safety statistics on the car and why you should choose our vehicle.
Yeah.
What
So
were you
really
saying,
emotional,
Kate?
really impactful, memorable, all the things that we want to do. And Kate commented earlier, it's not that we need production crews and film expertise and all this stuff. It's the concepts and the principles that they use. You can do it on, low budget or no budget. It's the ideas that you want to try to emulate.
I also wanted to comment on your idea, Mike, that marketers actually differentiate customer experience with playing around with different types of formats and just media. I have kind of a understanding that sometimes in the learning and development, we actually rely on different media assets just for the sake of having them. Like we need to differentiate something, then we'll have a video and we'll have an audio file and we have an infographics file. But at the end of the day, we don't think of then, do we actually need it? Because, for example, I have seen so many times when, for example, a company invests into creating a great series of videos for their sales representatives who actually spend most of their days in cars, and they don't need to watch videos because
Yeah.
actually it doesn't fit their working life at all. And probably audio and podcasts will work much better. And just here it comes, the first thing, context. The context is key, and marketers understand it very well. Like if I understand that this is the right channel for me to deliver my message, then it's just a win situation. And to understand it, you need to dive deeper in who your learner are. I don't speak about creating learner personas. I know that there is kind of a buzz around that, like you need to create them. It's very deep work, and I understand that kind of on a daily basis you won't do that, but you just need to understand how your learning may fit into your learner's life, into their real job duties, because at the end of the day they were hired to do their job duties, not to learn. And when you understand that, you create content that fits into that.
Well, and I think your point on, the learner, whatever the term is you called, I think what the risk you're pointing out is that we can over process this kind of thing. And I've seen that happen where it's like, oh, now we have to do this for every single thing. And it's like, whoa, no. Like, is there a point in understanding who your audience is? Like you said, if you're dealing with salespeople, sending out something that only works when you're in a VR headset or sitting behind a desk is just, you're not considering where your audience is, type of a thing. And that doesn't require 6 weeks of audience assessment and analysis to understand, like, oh yeah, okay, that's how they're operating. So I think that's a really good point. There were two things that came to mind listening to this. One is, for those of you who haven't read the book, How People Learn by Nick Shackleton Jones, it's a great read. But he talks about how memory is tied so closely to emotion. And Mike, I just think of that Subaru commercial that you talked about. And that is one of the big differences, even in that McDonald's thing. One invokes an emotional response that then locks that in. So instead of just going, yeah, here's a bunch of facts that my brain is going to purge when I sleep tonight in my REM cycle, it's actually going to stick because it's going to go, that incited an emotional response in me that I care about. And now I'm going to remember that. And my mind is going to recreate that memory because it's tied to an emotion versus a list of things that I can't distinguish from this. And then I did have one other question, but one funny thing, Kate, that you brought up that made me think of something is the experimentation of different and creative ways to kind of learn about your audience. I still remember one of the most successful things we did in an organization, I won't mention where, but we wrote, to get our onboarding program kicked off, we wrote a satirical Onion-esque article that said, "Man burns down corporate building after horrible onboarding experience." And then it was this just hilarious story about this guy who had the experience of the average employee and why they burned the building down. But then we talked about, and we've helped solve this. Last scene, he was apologized after discovering this group's training program, and the amount of people that went to it because they were like, "Oh my gosh, that just stuck." And it was one of those, we didn't know I got in huge trouble by the exec team because they're like, "You didn't ask our permission to send that out." But it's stuck. And I think that attention economy of how do we grab people? And that doesn't mean that has to be the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, I think there's a large element of just being different, right? Like we see so much stuff all the time. If you can, our brains are really, really lazy, right? And we find shortcuts, right? So if I see stuff that's, oh yeah, it's the same bullet points, it's boring, like I'm not going to pay attention. But if you can break that mold, and to your story, like that's unexpected. Like people set up and they take note. It's not, it's not yet another corporate memo that we've seen 1,000 of. And so I think, and it's getting harder and harder to do, but I think just to stand out and be different is one of the first steps to be able to get noticed and get that attention. because, as we know, if you can't get attention, then it could be the best thing in the world and it doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Well,
and
go for it.
just the very last thing I want to bring up here is that to stand out, sometimes you need just to make a very, very little step of appealing to your audience and talking to them in a friendly way, kind of assuming that there is a friend of yours in front of you just needing some information from you. Don't try to make them learn something. Just tell them something that they may just kind of benefit from, and kind of this very, very slight of tone of your phrases, of using you generously, will actually help you stand out among lots of other boring and dull content. It's very easy thing to take.
Well, and if you think about the fact as AI and machines continue to rise, the hunger people have for human connectivity and feeling that human voice, to your point, sometimes standing out is a lot easier than we realize, because when you're just authentic and real, people are like, wow, that's different than the corporate bureaucratic, like boring email type of a thing. So hopefully the comments have been blowing up all over the place. So can we get a round of emojis for Kate and Mike and their incredible insights on this? And hopefully this has really given you something to think about in terms of how can you actually bring some of these insights from marketing and change the way you do things. But Kate, I love the fact that you called out, you don't need a production team and a whole team of people behind this to do a whole ad agency around this kind of stuff. There are simple steps that you can take to really call things out. And again, thank you all for the resources on this as well. I think this is one of the great opportunities that we always have to share this kind of stuff.